out to Nigeria, and gruesome images coming in from Bama, a remote town in northeastern Borno State where at least 55 people were killed by the militant group Boko Haram. The video is hard to look at as the militants left piles of bodies in buildings and others by the roadside. Authorities say around 200 heavily armed members of Boko Haram arrived in buses and pickup trucks and carried out a coordinated strike, first hitting the army barracks and the police station before breaking into the town's prison and freeing up to 100 prisoners. Human Rights Watch says Nigeria's military is covering up attacks on civilians in its fight against Boko Haram in the north. As VOA Scout Stearns reports, Nigeria's government says it's investigating the allegations.
Human Rights Watch says last month's violence in the northern Nigerian town of Baga show more than 2,000 buildings destroyed. Nigeria's military says only several dozen homes were burned during an attack by the militant group Boko Haram. But Human Rights Watch Deputy Washington Director Sarah MARGON has doubts.
It doesn't look like it was done with rocket-propelled grenades, which is what Boko Haram tends to use, but instead going sort of house-to-house fires.
Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has ordered an investigation into the violence. MARGON says the discrepancies suggest there's something to hide.
There's been very different information, and it would seem to us that something is being covered up, in fact.
State Department spokesman Patrick Ventrell says U.S. officials are closely studying the Human Rights Watch findings.
President Jonathan has called for an investigation, including ascertaining if security forces, namely the Joint Border Control Forces in the area, had adhered to the rules of engagement. So we urge a full investigation into these attacks and that those responsible, both military and others, be held to account.
Boko Haram appears to be stepping up its attacks with more lethal weapons.
This increasing sophistication of arms, of tactics, I think is extremely worrying.
Center for Strategic and International Studies Africa Director Jennifer COOKE.
When you're confronted with people with rocket-propelled grenades, you're going to need strong military response. But the great danger is that in doing so, the Nigerian security forces are alienating the communities in which Boko Haram is embedded and making it almost impossible to get cooperation and intelligence from those communities.
MARGON says that creates a cycle of violence in which no one is held to account and authorities too easily shift blame.
We have yet to see in this case of Baga how far up the chain any indiscriminate attacks may go, but certainly a full and complete and independent investigation is going to be very important to showing that the Nigerian military is going to be held to account.
While encouraging Nigeria to address economic inequalities in the north, the Obama administration is backing the fight against Boko Haram, says Secretary of State John Kerry.
They are facing some tough violence in the northern part of the country, which we condemn, and we join with them in helping to fight against extremism.
COOKE says there's only so much Washington can do.
We have to admit the limits of our influence in a place like Nigeria. There's a huge political game going on with Nigeria. Goodluck Jonathan is looking to his next election.
The suggestion that Boko Haram's rebellion is rooted in underdevelopment is not a popular message for politicians who worry that responding with greater social spending could encourage insurrection in other poor areas of the country. Scott Stearns, VOA News at the State Department.
Well, the most recent attack has forced President Goodluck Jonathan to return to Abuja and meet with his military advisors. Joining me now is Scott Stearns, our correspondent at the State Department. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Vincent.
Now, some are saying that what we're noticing now, especially with the attack in Bama, is not just that Boko Haram is actually stepping up its campaign of violence, but also there are indications that this group is affiliated possibly with other regional groups like Ansar Dine. What are you hearing?
That is a concern, certainly following the rise of more militant Islamic fundamentalists in northern Mali. There's not yet any intelligence evidence that would indicate a link between Boko Haram and Ansar Dine or AQIM, for example, although it is something that people in the intelligence community are watching. The danger there, according to human rights officials, is that that's a narrative that the Goodluck Jonathan government would like to propagate. It not only helps bring in outside support to help them in the fight against Boko Haram, but it deflects some of the internal blame weakens the message that this is indeed about the underdevelopment and social inequality in the North if you can blame it on a sort of broader terrorist infrastructure.
Indeed, if this was to fit into the global war on terrorism, what can powers like the United States do in this particular case?
You know, that's, especially in this part of Africa, is going to be the chief goal of the UN peacekeeping force, which is soon to take charge of the operations in northern Mali as French and Chadian forces pull back and some of the West African forces move in. The idea is not unlike those that the international community has taken in Afghanistan, for instance, that this must be accompany development and reaching out to local communities. As you heard in that package, one of the problems that the Nigerian military is facing in the north is that communities there are so afraid, in many cases, of the Joint Task Force that there's simply no reliable intelligence information or cooperation with local populations which would help both identify and preempt Boko Haram action.
Scott, thanks a lot for joining us today. Scott Stearns, our correspondent at the State Department.